Hello lovely people, I'm Catherine and welcome to this week's Comfort Coverlet Stitching episode video. Last week I couched the circle and appliqued on the little woolly frayed heart, and then I did go on and do a couple of rows of double running stitch. So I'm trying to hold it so you can see. So I did a line of gold running stitch inside my couch circle, and I kind of tried to keep my stitches excuse me, relatively even and the spaces the same length as the stitch. And then I went round again between the spaces with blue, and it was just 2 strands of embroidery floss. And then I did the same around the outside. I did the gold running stitch first, and then I went round and did the red. And this is a stitch that's often seen in cantha embroidery. So I just stopped a couple of stitches before the end, just in case some of you weren't sure. So I left my needle in there. So I'm here in the space. Hope you can see properly. So I go down into where the next stitch comes out. And so the space of this red stitch becomes the space of the gold stitch becomes the red stitch, basically. I think it's pretty straightforward. If you're at all unsure, if you go back to the embroidery stitches for Nakshi Kantha, which is in the Slowstitch Project 2024 playlist, you'll see there. So then to make the last one, I'm just going to shoot through to the back. But basically what I'd say is, once you've got your couch circle, I think it is nice to kind of echo it with various whatever stitching you fancy. You could do any embroidery stitches that you like, you know, anything that floats your boat. And I think because my couch, because I use the sari silk, is quite bold, I think if I do a few lines of different kinds of stitching around, it kind of sits it into the background a little bit, if you see what I mean. It kind of acts as a, you know, an intermediary between the thick couch line and the flat surface of the cloth. So I'm going to finish off this bit of red, and I thought the next thing I would go round with is a whipped running stitch, which I always call a Marion stitch. If you follow Marion on Marion's World, you will know that she loves a whipped running stitch, or a whipped any kind of stitch actually. So yeah, so whip running stitch to me is now Marion stitch. Talking of Marion, if you don't follow her, do go and check out her channel because it's lovely. She has a similar ethos to me, I would say, but she's much more traditional embroidery. But, oh sorry, someone's knocking a bin or something outside. Shh, no, Stella's going to bark. No, it's okay, it's just the neighbour with their bin. So yeah, you can go and check her out. Last year she did a project called, I'm just choosing some thread, she did a project called a phenology wheel. So every day she made a little painting on a wheel of a plant in her garden. And she just recently did a video showing how she'd made it into a book, and it's absolutely stunning. Absolutely stunning. If you haven't seen that, I'll put a link to that video in case you don't know Marion. Do go and watch that. And in that video as well, she talks about creativity and you know, how to motivate yourself, or how she motivated herself. So it's, apart from seeing her beautiful phenology wheel, it's also interesting to listen to her thoughts on that. I think I'm going to go for this rusty red colour for my stitching, and then I might whip it with this blue while I'm here, which has now got snagged up because it's a big long bit. Okay, got it. Right, so I'll put that somewhere. So sitting here in this chair, I don't have well, I've got surfaces to put things on, but I don't have my little table. I suppose I could have brought my little table over. So I'm going to go with 2 strands of embroidery floss again. And I see that, you know, a lot of you have couched a circle, a lot of you have done different things when I look on Instagram or in the private Facebook group, which is where I see all your lovely pictures. But if you've put, and I might go around the heart as well, if you put a sort of surface element on that stands proud, you know, that's got some real dimension to it, I always like to go around that a little bit. I just don't want to lose my bit of thread. Sorry for waving my arms about. I always like to echo that a little bit with stitching, just to sit it into the background, you know, just to, I don't know how to say it. I hope you understand what I mean. Right. And I take 2 strands off individually and then put them back together and run my thumbnail along. It just makes them lay better than if you try and get 2 strands out in one go, I find. Right, so I think I'm going to go around the outside of my circle again. I'm doing a knot. I'm not from that school of thought that says it's wrong to do knots. I'm going to start here at this end. I'm going to hide my knot behind my couch circle just because I can. So I'm just going in behind my couching. Cut that tail off. I'm not that bothered about, you know, I don't even mind knots and loose ends. I don't even mind them on the surface of my work, to be honest. I'm just showing you in case you do mind. And then I can go just into the very top layer of cloth and take my needle along to where I want to be. I think I'm going to go about 1/8 of an inch away from my previous line of stitching. And I'm just going to do running stitch all the way around, and again I'm going to try, without stressing myself out too much, to keep the stitch and the space more or less the same length. But I just would recommend stitching if you're new to slow stitching or hand stitching, or you know, and you think that your running stitch doesn't have a pleasant rhythm or line or whatever, I highly recommend the Stitch Meditation Scrolls. There's a video going way back on my channel. I'll try and remember to put a link to that if you haven't seen it. And the thing about those is because you basically find a spool or a stick or something of that kind, and you get yourself a long strip of cloth, can be any length you like. Mine are typically a few feet long. And then I collage on by invisible based stitching little scraps of cloth, and then those scrolls sit ready for me. Have I got one handy? I digress. I think there might be one behind me. Just feeling about in my basket. Is that one? Yeah, here we go. Here's one. This is one. And the advantage of them, apart from I think that they're just lovely objects in their own right when they're made, is the process of making them. And once you've got all your little pieces basted on, basically you can stitch for however many feet long they are. You can just stitch in a line. They're narrow, so you've got a guideline always. You can, you know, visualize the edge of your piece and keep your stitches in line with that. But they give you a chance to get into a rhythm with your running stitch, because you just stitch and stitch and stitch in a straightish line, without having to turn or curve or anything like that. And I think they're great if you're not happy with the rhythm of your running stitches. These are a great way to just, you know, make. You could even just make them with bigger pieces of cloth, or, you know, just a couple of long strips basted together. You don't have to do the collage, and just stitch on them. And it's very meditative and mindful, but at the same time it kind of establishes your rhythm of running stitch. That was a digression. Well, it just occurred to me. Right, back to this running stitch on this cloth. I also see that some of you have gone ahead and done your own thing, which is absolutely fine and great, because you can't wait for each week's video to come around. I mean, I have lots of different projects on the go, some of us do, so I'm happy to pick this up and put it down. But I must say that it sits here over the back of my chair, And I do eye it sometimes in the evening when I'm sitting over there on the sofa and kind of, my fingers are itching to stitch on it. But I have to obviously wait until, Wednesday. And the thing is as well, with if you're in for the year for making a section every month, this January section doesn't have to be finished at the end of January, or ever. It doesn't ever have to be finished, really. So what I mean is, once we get onto February's and we start putting February's together, and I have a little vague idea of what that's going to be like. If you're up to date with February's week by week, you can always go back to January's and put more stitching on it. So it's just a very free and relaxed process. And even when we've then joined January's and February's together, and I'll give you an option to either join them together as you go along, which is what I will do, or just keep them all 12 separate until the end of the year and then join all 12 together. But if you've joined January's and February's together, and then we start on March's, jumping ahead, you can go back and stitch over January's and February's, as one piece. So this is all, and I know some of you are not yet entirely comfortable with this way of working, and I'm glad you're giving it a go if that's you. But that's the beauty of this for me, is that there is so much freedom within it, within the process, and it doesn't have a beginning and a middle and an end. It's more, it's more easygoing than that. Okay, so I've finished my running stitch all around the outside of my couch circle, and I've got 3 strands of my bluey grey just to make it a bit more standy outy. And I've taken a needle with a slightly bigger eye. I think this is a size 7. The advantage of whipping as well is that if you've got a thick thread that's not very nice to stitch with, to do running stitch with or whatever, when you're whipping you only have to come up through the cloth at the beginning and down through the cloth at the end. So you can use up your thicker threads, or maybe if you've got nubbly threads, or threads that are unpleasant to stitch with. So I'm going to come back to where I started my running stitch. Sometimes the other thing I do, if I can, is squeak in between the seam line if there's one nearby. So like I can get my needle in under there, and I want to come up about halfway that first running stitch. I'll see if this works. I don't think I've gone through to the back, no. And so then I'll just pop my knot. I've got a knot in my thread. I'll just pop my knot in behind that seam, and there we go. So I'm going to take the eye of my needle, and coming through from the same side all the time, I'm going to go under that stitch and pull it through. And then the next stitch, and I don't go back that way, just keep coming from the same side all the time. And the eye of the needle, because it doesn't catch on the stitches. And it's actually very nice to do, very therapeutic, and it gives a lovely effect. The Marion stitch. Yeah, when I said Marion does traditional embroidery, she does it in a very artistic way, but she's an absolute encyclopedia of embroidery stitches, and also she's lovely at painting. She does beautiful paintings, and all kinds of other things. And I think she's on the way, if she's not there already, to hitting 50,000 subscribers. So if you don't subscribe already, head over and subscribe, and let's get her over that 50 mark. And the other channel I wanted to talk about, I seem to be publicising other channels today, is Book and Paper Arts, which is someone called Kelly. And she is, as the channel name suggests, Book and Paper Arts, although I do think she does do some stitching as well. But she gave me a shout out recently because her video, I think it was on Sunday, was making meditation scrolls that I just talked about, which is what reminded me, but making them out of paper. And I want to make some, or at least one, following her method. So I'll try and remember to put a link to that as well if you want to go and have a look if you like paper. And I'm even thinking about making a paper one and stitching on it as well. We'll see. If I do that, obviously I'll show you at some point somewhere. So I'm just whipping my way around. And what I love about stitching on a pieced background like this, where you've got all the different, you know, colours and shades of cloth, is the way that the surface stitching then is different everywhere. You know, I mean, it's very subtle here on this check, but when I come onto the plainer cloth, it'll stand out more. And I like that variation. I just think it gives real character to the piece. You can find doing this that your thread twists, so you can just untwist it a little bit, you know, just, you can hang it. It's difficult for me to do and how I'm sitting, but you can hang it and let it untwist, or you can just untwist it like that. I'm just going from the same side all the time. It's got a lovely rhythm, and you can whip any kind of stitch. You could whip chain stitch, back stitch, you know, all kinds of embroidery stitches. But I just like the look it gives. It's also used a lot in Kantha embroidery, Indian Kantha embroidery, where it's known as interlaced running stitch. And I used it on the spine of my journal, where I did rows of running stitch and then interlaced a pattern, you know, going on the diagonal up and down. There's a little video somewhere a way back showing how I did that interlaced running stitch. So, you know, you can, so many things you can do with just a simple idea of a stitch. To be a bit careful here, because that's my granny's shawl and it's quite soft. I don't want to poke into it. And this is picking up this kind of bluey grey in my granny's shawl as well. I mean, I don't really stick to a colour palette as such because I put so much stitching on, and I think if you put so much stitching on, it will all play nicely together. You know, all the different colours. But I guess I started with my little 9 patch, which was a vintage one, if you saw episode 1. Which is red and blue, and then I put the cream with it, and now I've added in the gold. But my coverlet at the end of the year is very likely to be all the colours. You know, and I'm not very matchy-matchy. That's just me. If you want to be matchy-matchy, I'm not saying don't. You'll never hear me say don't. Well, I am enjoying colour, because as many as you know, I'm an eco-printer, natural dyer. And all these are, although these are quite grungy, vintagey colours, you know, it's still bright colour for me. I think maybe I I need that at the moment. I need to work with bright colours, so just go with it. Yeah, so I'm just going to whip myself back round to the beginning. That sounds wrong. Interlace. I'm going to interlace my stitches back round to the beginning, and then I'll be back to show you what I'm going to do next. Okay, I need to get a bit more thread. I haven't got quite enough to get to the end, so I just wanted to show you what I do. So I've gone under this stitch. I've, you know, gone under with my thread. So I'm just going to shoot through to the back somewhere halfway along and just behind that stitch. Like so, and then go to the back and do my couple of little back stitches on the spot, and then bury my tail just in between the layers. I'm going to go up into where the couching is on the other side, because it's a nice big space to bury it in. Cut that off close. Get my other bit. Should lay in here ready for me. Now this is the other half of the 6 strands, so I'm not going to separate them all out. although you could. I'm going to thread them into my needle. Oops. And then I'm just going to run my thumbnail I'm holding it quite firmly along, just to sort of flatten them out a bit. Otherwise they can tend to twist and, you know, get a bit tangly. I'll just do that a couple of times. I don't wax my thread when I'm doing my fancy stitching. I don't find it necessary, and I'm saying it because I get asked quite often when I talk about tangling and things. And I think it sort of takes the fluff out of the thread a little bit, sort of flattens it, which is not something I like. If I was piecing, I might wax my thread just to strengthen it and make it flow, you know, through more easily, but to be honest, I don't really often bother. Right, so I'm going to hide my tail again somewhere behind my couching, somewhere next to where I went out. Just because I can, and just because, you know, I think I should really show you these things. Tail off. Throw the tail on the floor because it's me doing the housework, so right, go into that first layer, and now I'm aiming to come out with my needle in about the same place where I went down, but on the side of the stitch that I'm whipping from. So in my case that's south of the stitch. And then I just go under the stitch with the eye of my needle, and on I go. And so in that way, where you stopped and started, you've come up and you've gone down in the same place, and it won't be noticeable. Do you see? Do you see? You probably don't see. I hope that was clear enough. So basically where you went down to finish off, you come up in the same place. But you whip the stitch, well, I whip the stitch with the finishing off thread, because I go down behind it, and then I whip it again with the starting thread. But honestly, there's so much going on these pieces, I don't really worry about things like that, but I just know some people do, so tell you the so-called proper way, and then you can decide for yourself whether you want to do it or not. Basically, whatever you're happy doing and whatever you're happy with looking at in your finished work is right. Okay, so last one. And there we go. So that's my singly interlaced. Now you could, if you wanted to make it even more dominant, you could go round and whip back the other way. So you can turn your work round, and don't go back under the stitch that way, because it'll, you know, undo what you did. And just going from the same direction again, just, you know, go back the other way, whipping from the same direction, and then that'll give you a double line. But I'm not going to, because I don't feel like it, and you can't make me. I'll show you how it looks on the back. So on the back I've got quite a circle going on. I've got quite a lot of space in the middle of the circle still. You can see my little heart, and you can see my basting. But you see here where I've stitched over and over the basting, it's not a problem at all anymore. It's not going to catch on anything, so I'm not going to worry about that. So the next thing I wanted to do is, well, there's two things. One is I want to stitch around my little heart, probably just with some running stitch. And the other thing is I want to stitch something in this 9 patch, this vintage wrinkly little 9 patch of mine. Because this is kind of the true centre of my cloth. And I just feel that I want a circle actually on that true centre. So I might take one of these strands off. Actually no, I won't, because it's the wrong needle. It's too big a needle. I'm going to use this actually. This is the bit of gold that I had, that I, you know, did the running stitch with. Yeah, I'm going to use that on there. So I'm going to, there's many different ways you can put a circle, or any shape. You can draw around something, which is what I did for the couching. Well, my favourite way for doing little circles is I've got lots of these. This is a bit of envelope. I drew around something, I cut out a circle. You can see I've used it many times, and I just pin it on with my applique pins, which, because they're so tiny, don't bite you, and go around the corners quite nicely. We know they don't go round corners, but you know what I mean. At one point this circle template will fall apart and then I'll have to make another one, but I kind of get attached to them, which may be a bit strange. It's just a bit of old envelope. It's not thrift really, it's more sentimental value. I don't know. Who knows? I'm not doing anybody any harm, so with my little circle that I've had for I don't know how many years. It is in fact going to go, this might be its last gasp from all the little holes in it. But I'm just pinning that on where I want it, and I'm just going to stitch around it. And again, can I hide my tail from the front? It's hiding your tail from the front if there's a seam you can pop into. It saves you also turning it over all the time, you know, and that's helpful certainly if you're working on a bigger piece especially. What I will then sometimes do, instead of going on with a running stitch, because that's now only held by a knot, I might make the first stitch a back stitch. So I'll go back however long I want my running stitches to be and then come forward, and that anchors it as well as the knot. So now I'm just going to stitch quite small running stitches around the edge of that circle, just off the edge of my template, my raggy bit of envelope. And I just stitch around once and then I take the, now there again, sorry, I take the template off. There's quite a thick junction in there, there's a lot of cloth. I don't need to make every stitch go right through to the back and right through to the front. There where it's so thick, I'm just going to take a stitch into whatever feels comfortable for the needle, however many layers that is. I can feel I haven't gone right through, but it doesn't matter, as long as you go right through for the most part to hold everything together. If you get a really thick area, I think I've mentioned it before, but it bears repeating, there's absolutely no harm at all in just taking a top layer or two of the cloth for the odd stitch here and there. Now here there's a big pleat in this 9 patch. See, there's a real pleat there, but I'm just going to stitch straight over it. Just putting my knee up so I can see. Yeah, I do struggle. It's quite a long way away. Normally if I was on the sofa stitching I would have my knees up or a cushion on my knee to bring it up closer to me, and I suppose I could have put a cushion on here, but I didn't. But for the most part I don't mind if I can't really see properly, but sometimes you need to see more properly, more closely. Again, there's a thick bit there. I'm just going to go through the top layers wherever it feels comfortable and not worry. I'm going back to the beginning. I think I can get one more stitch. I won't make the last stitch, I'll leave that in because I think there's enough in there to go round again. But now I can get that template off. Poor little thing. Oops. It's very possible as well that when it's no longer any use as a template, I'll put it in my collage paper box and use it for collage. It's funny the things you get attached to. Anyway, I usually keep one or two, there's another one in there, look, one or two here under my pincushion. So I've got them handy. Anyway, so yeah. So there, can you see? I'm showing you something. Look up if you've looked down, if you can see. I've just stitched a little circle round that centre square, and because this is so rumply and crumply I want to do a lot of stitching on here, so I'm going to do another line with this because I think there's enough. And so that last stitch I'm going to go just through the top layer, and then I'm going to come inside my circle that I just stitched, just angle my needle inside, So, and then I'm going to stitch round again inside that first line. And I think I'm going to keep the stitching quite subtle. Like I'm not going to do any whipping or interlacing or anything like that. I think it's only going to be running stitch and maybe some seed stitch. Yes, I think that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do, again, I'm only going through the top layer there because it's thick. And again, I'm going back into the through everything because I can. And so yeah, so I think I'll do this second circuit, and why are you twisting now? And I'm pulling my stitches a little bit tighter to kind of settle the puckers a bit in the cloth, and then pulling the cloth back again just so it lays nice, and just play with it till it looks pleasing. I quite like the look of those puckers now actually. Now that they're framed, they seem more intentional. So I might have another think about my seed stitch idea, and I might just leave it. I don't know. If you're not sure, leave it, go work somewhere else and then come back to it. Sorry, it's the neighbour's dog barking. My threads have got completely different lengths because of me pulling at the stitching. Yeah, so if you're, if you're focused in on an area and you find that you're not really sure anymore, just go and work somewhere else. Just go and, work on another area or work on something else entirely and then come back to it. I can't see now to thread my needle. There we go, got it. And be a little bit flexible in your planning, like I was there. Like I'd said, right, I'm going to do 2 lines of running stitch around this circle and then I'm going to do seed stitch. Then I looked at it and I thought, well actually, what before I was aiming to fix, in inverted commas, all that puckering, I'm now enjoying. Like I said, because it's got the frame of the stitching around it, it feels more, intentional. And that's a personal thing. Some of you might really not like the look of the wrinkling and the puckering and want to fix it, which you can do either by stitching it down, in any way you like, running stitch, seed stitch, whatever. You could do some French knots maybe a few French knots, because there are little white dots on the cloth. And there's these little diamond shapes. So maybe I could do either some tiny French knots or some tiny just single stitches, somehow echoing those lines. I'll see. But if I'm unsure, I'll leave it, I'll go work somewhere else, and then I'll come back. So I just want to do one more thing sitting here, and then I'll stop and set up on my desk for doing the writing, the words. Oh, sorry, I knocked you, made you wobble. So the final thing I'm going to do, apart from throwing my scissors on the floor, is go around this heart. And I think I want to do that in blue. I've got a darker blue. Where's a darker blue? To do. Oops. So I'm just going to get 2 strands of this. And so after today, we've got 1 more week for the stitching on this, and then the week after that, in 2 weeks' time, we'll be starting February's. So next week, I have some idea, you know, I have some ideas. It's a little bit different for me because I don't usually think ahead when I'm working, but I am, probably because I'm wanting to make sure that when it comes around time to make the video that I know what I'm going to do and I don't, you know, sit here going so yeah, so it's interesting and a little bit challenging for me, but you know, it's fine. I'm happy. Don't worry about me. So yeah, so I have got some ideas for next week, some other things I want to do on here, which I'll share with you, and I'm almost certain not to finish stitching on it. So I think next week we'll be sharing the ideas that I've got and then talking a little bit about how I'm going to complete the stitching on this as far as I'm going before I start February's. And then when the first Wednesday in February comes along and we start February's, I'll show you, you know, I'll just keep you up to date with the progress on January's, if that makes any sense. Right, so I'm going to go in again, somewhere under the single layer. I'm going to come about 1/8 of an inch off the edge, pop my knot in, do the same thing again, start with a back stitch as if it was a running stitch. That makes so that whatever length you want your stitches to be. You won't be able to see on the blue, probably blue on blue. And I think you know what a back stitch is. I'm just going around the edge of my little woolly heart, just with some running stitches, just to, like I said before, I just think it makes it sit nicely. And because I'm using the blue, which is virtually the same colour as this blue cloth, on the blue cloth you can't see it, but now when I come onto the beige or tan cloth, you will see it. So that, I think, will nicely wed this heart, if that's the right word, to the two different backgrounds. I don't know if I've explained that very well. I'm also trying not to pull my hand up towards the camera because I'm aware that makes it go blurry. So this blue stitching kind of onto here continues this colour blue of the patch into this area. That's what I'm trying to say. And here when I go onto this check, the stitch will look different again. That stitch there, can you see, is a piecing stitch from when I joined those two patches. So I'm just going to stitch on as if it's not there. So yes, it's not very noticeable on this red and green check, but then when I come back round onto the other bit of tan coloured cloth over here, it will show up more again. And yeah, I just think that anchors it to the blue cloth there. There's a tiny bit of tail poking out there from where I tucked the thread in. I'll shove it in a bit, push it in, there we go. There we go. I'll take my last stitch. I think I want to go round again. I liked it so much I want to go round again. I went through right to the back, so I'm going to come up again. About 1/8 of an inch away again and just carry on round a second time. Sometimes I'm guided by if there's thread left in my needle. Not always, but Sometimes I'm guided by what I think the work needs, sometimes it's what I feel like doing. No rhyme or reason to it really, it's just all part of the process. Stella's sighing. She's snoozing on the sofa. We had a nice walk this morning. A couple of her friends were out, so she had a good play and a good run around. Fred's in his basket. His basket. He thinks it's his basket. I did think it was my basket, but apparently it isn't. Now as I come around here, I'm going to hit up against my other stitching that I did there. And really I want to come to here to carry on. That's only about an inch, so I'm just going to go through the top layer and try and push my needle through, only through the top layer, and come out where I need to be. I'm going to check on the back. Yes, I can't see my needle on the back, so that's okay. Over an inch, that's okay. I might even go slightly further, and I might even sort of come up part way and then go back down again if it's too far to get the needle through in one go. But more than a couple of inches I would stop and start again. Maybe one more stitch. I'll have to make it slightly smaller to fit it in. And yeah, I think while I've got this bit of blue left in my needle, I'm going to do something in the middle there, but something very subtle. I'm going to stop and start because it's too far to jump. Alright, felt like it came right through, but it didn't. I'm going to have to get my scissors, which I've dropped on the floor. Put them behind me. Sorry, you probably didn't hear me because I turned my head away. I'll put them behind me. So I've got this little bit left. Don't think I want to do much. You probably won't be able to see, but that's why I want to use this colour, so it's not really visible as a stitch. I'm just going to sort of almost just tack it. I think I will come up. So I've just gone in through the seam, just through the top layer. I'm going to come up about there. I'm about ½ an inch away from the edge of my patch. And I'm between two of those lines of dots. I mean, this would obviously be completely different for you. It's also possible that, you know, yours isn't puckery because you've made it yourself and you've not made it puckery. I'm just going to do, it's very tiny invisible base basically is what I'm doing. So I'm taking a tiny back stitch, but then on the back I'm only coming forward about ½ an inch. So it's invisible base, but it's a tiny invisible base. I'm just going to do this one line and see how it looks. And this is more about changing the texture of the surface of the cloth rather than adding a decorative element as such. Yeah, I like that. So I'm going to take this last little tiny back stitch just through the top layer, jump across maybe somewhere here, and do the same thing again down between these two lines of dots. I don't really need to be lining up on the dots because you can hardly see it, like I said. It's just, if there's something there to line up on, then why not? I think I've just got enough thread to do a third row. Yeah, I'm happy with that. I think I might even, I might put a couple more lines in, but I'll do that later. I'll just go in between and do the same thing a couple more times. But I like the way that's kind of, get your hand out of the way so they can see, Catherine. I like the way it's making that puckered surface look more intentional still. And with regards to these squares, I might do the same in those as well. So just some lines of this little invisible base. I'll show you on the back. I'm going to turn over. So you see my stitches in between were that big. So, and you can see on the back where the little space in between is my dot on the front. So I think I'm going to do that in all the blue squares, just as a way of making that puckering look more, you know, pleasing to me. And again, that's just me. You might either say, I love it, I'm going to leave it as it is, or you might say, I want to cover it up completely or make it completely sit down flat, in which case you could do something like a heavy seed stitch all over or something like that. That's what I've gone with. Right, so yeah, so I'm going to put some words on, and I'm going to go and set up on my desk like I said, and I'll have a think about where I'm going to put the words, and I'll show you when I get there. So I'll see you in a minute over on my desk. Okay, so I'm sitting on my desk. I've written on just with a normal pencil, not that one, a soft pencil. This is a 4B. I've written my words on because I have to get my head over to do that, so you wouldn't have been able to see anyway. But I had this patch of pale tan colour where they'd show up nicely, so I just kind of ghost wrote, so just made the movements with my pencil. Excuse me, I don't know why I've got such a frog in my throat today. Just for the spacing, you know, just roughly. I mean, the word don't is bigger and the word self is in capitals and deliberately bigger, so it's very wonky. If you want to space it out more precisely, then you go for it, but I just sort of pretended to write don't give yourself away, just to give myself an idea as to how it would fit, and then I've gone ahead and written that on. So I've got in my needle 2 strands of dark grey embroidery floss, and the words self, well, yourself is one word, but I'm splitting it into 2. I'm going to stitch the way we did, and if you followed me last year for the Slow Stitch journal, the way I did that text. But the other words, I'm going to use a kind of stitch and couch technique. So I'm going to start with the word don't. I'm going to again go in between that seam there to bury my knot. I'm going to start with the straight stick of it, you know, the stick, whatever you call that. Pop my knot in, and so that I'm going to make that one long stitch, that whole stick, that whole leg of the letter D, and that would be too long a stitch really. So once I've pulled that through, I'm going to come back up just to one side of it in a couple of spots, and how many places I did this would depend on how long that letter was. Mine's about ½ an inch long, so I'm going to take 2 little couching stitches over it. So I'm coming up to one side of it and then going down the other side, so just to tack it down. I'm trying to keep my arm out of your way so you can see. Got a great long lazy girl thread, of course I have. And then I'm going to come back, go a little bit further along. I'm sort of spacing them out, but you know, don't really have to. But you just want them literally to be the length they need to be, just to cover that stitch. That was a little bit too big really. You could almost put your needle, push the long strand to one side and let your needle go back in the same hole you came out of, to make it even smaller. There we go, that's better. You see that second one's much less visible. So now to do the curved part, I'm going to come up at the beginning of that curve of the D, poking around till I get the right place. And then I'm going to lay my thread on, holding it in place with my thumb, and kind of judge the length it needs to be. So I'm just laying it over that curve of the D and pulling through. And then I need to put my thumb there, which means, you know, I'll do my best so that you can see. But do you get the idea? So I'm just making sure I've pulled it not too tight but not too loose, so it's covering that D. and then I'm going to come up again the same as before in a couple of places, one side of that piece of thread. Don't pull it too tight the first time or you'll tighten the loop you made, and then go under. I'm jumping over that loop of thread but going back in more or less in the same hole that I came out of. Don't get a knot, that's not helpful. So serve you right for getting a lazy girl thread. There we go. And depending on how big your letter is, how big a curve it is or whatever, you know, will depend on how many couching stitches you need and where you space them. But I sort of aim for about 1/8 of an inch apart or so, maybe slightly more, between the couching stitches. So here I'm going to push that loop with my needle across and go down through the same hole I came up. So I'm trapping the loop of the D. And then I can sort of see that I need one more up there. So I'm going to go outside my drawn line with my needle and come up. And then I can push that loop up to where it needs to be. So my thread's going to go over that loop. So I'm going over the other side of the loop, but I'm going back in. Can you see I've got my needle under that loop and I'm going back down through the same hole. And that pulls that into place. And then apart from that first stitch, which I did slightly too big, but I'm just going to leave it, it does make quite a nice D, letter D, and quite a nice curve. So for the O, I'll come up at the bottom of the O, and then the same thing again, you want to lay your thread on just to get an idea of how much you need. I'm sorry, I have to keep my thumb there or I'll lose it, and I go back down through the same hole, or just to one side of it. It's just, you know, a thread to one side of it, and just pull it until you're happy with the tension. So it's laying there now, it's just a loop, and then I'm going to come back up about 1/8 of an inch into the loop, and then just take, don't pull it too tight, and to take those little couching stitches. So just push the loop to one side so I can see where I came out, and go back in with my needle. And you know, obviously if you've not done this before, you might want to have a little practice on a scrap before you go onto your cloth, unless you feel confident, and then you can go for it. So I'm going to come up here now, just on my drawn line, 1/8 of an inch round or so. And then I'm going to go over my loop and just trap it down, go back through the same hole I came up. And then I think if I just do one more over here on the left, this time I'm going to come just outside my drawn line because I need to pull that loop of thread out. So I'll come up on the outside and then just scooch that across with my needle and tack it down. And then the N, and I'll come up and make the straight. I always do the straight first if there's a straight stitch, you know, straight stitch involved in the letter. Now that's not that long, so I think I can get away with just coming up to the left of it to make the curve of the N, so that when I lay this loop on for the curve, that will also serve to couch down that stick, if that makes sense. So I'm going to go back in at the bottom of the curve of the N, and as I pull through I just hold that loop in place with my thumb, just to make sure, you know, I've pulled it through too much. Just pull it back a bit, just to make sure I've got the right amount of thread there basically. And then I'm going to come up just on my drawn line about 1/8 of an inch up. Don't pull it too tight, and go over my loop and back in through the same hole to trap that loop down. And then you can sort of see then where you need to put the next couch. So I need to go up here to at the very top of that curve of the end there, and then go over my loop and back in through the hole, and then you'll hopefully see that that will pull that up into place like that. And then for the little apostrophe I'm just going to do a tiny stitch. Just a tiny little stitch on the spot. And I'll just do the T. I won't do all the letters with you because number one, I think you've got the idea, and number two, it's super awkward the way I'm doing this, trying to not get my arms in your way so you can see what I'm doing. So here I'm going to do the crossbar last. I'm going to do the long bit first, and I want my T to have a curve. So I've come in at the top of the line. I'm going back out at the bottom of that line. But I'm doing that whole curve of that letter T as one long stitch, and then I'm gently pulling through and just wrangling that loop with my thumb, just to make sure that I've got the right amount of thread there. And then I'm going to come back up here somewhere on my drawn line, again about 1/8 of an inch along. Don't pull it too tightly, just gently till I just feel resistance, and pull it back into place with my needle and just stitch over it just to trap it down. Now I can use the crossbar of the T there to anchor the middle of it down, so I'll just do one straight stitch for the crossbar, and that's small enough not to need any anchoring. And then it doesn't really need another couching stitch at the top, near the top, but I think I'm going to just put one in anyway. It's a bit limit. It's a bit on the limit of whether it needed it or not. So, and it's, if you want to do kind of lowercase, actually I'm going to put another one between the crossbar and the start of the curve because it feels a bit long. It's just another way of stitching text, and if you want it to look more sort of like your handwriting, I think if you write on in pencil first and then do it this way, I just think it's, very effective. So I'm going to do everything except for self, and when I come to self, I'm going to do it in the same way that I did with the text stitching. So just with straight stitches in a blocky style. So the E, the L and the F are obvious because they're all straight lines, but the S I'm going to do a straight stitch, a straight stitch, a straight stitch, straight stitch, straight stitch, just to really make the word self stand out. So I hope that's helpful. I hope you like that way of stitching text. Have a go, like I said, on the scrap first maybe, unless you're confident, in which case go for it. So between now and next week I'm going to go and put in some more of these little blue dot stitches in all these blue areas, and I was thinking while I was transferring and setting up that I am going to do some red seed stitching in the red areas, because that will just be texture. Then I'll try and get a red that's as close as possible in colour and do some little seed stitches. And then I will need to do a lot more stitching in here because of the couching and all this stitching round and round. You see, it's really making it puckery, and the way to deal with that is always more stitching. I'm not entirely sure what yet. If I come up with something in the week and it's something straightforward, I might just go ahead and do it and then show you next time. And then next week we'll look at what to do outside the circle, or I'll share with you what I'm going to do outside the circle. And then the week after that will be February. So I hope I've given you enough ideas to carry on embellishing your circle, and maybe put some text on if you'd like to. And I hope I remember to put in the links. I'm going to put a link to Kelly's paper stitch meditation scrolls, Marion's phenology wheel, and my own stitch meditation scroll video, in case you're new here and you haven't seen that. So if you've got the time after you've watched this for an hour, go and check some of those. I've just nipped back to show you the stitching on the inside of the circle, which I finished. So I've done my words. I didn't mention, by the way, that these words come from the song Both Sides Now by Joni Mitchell. Don't give yourself away. So I did the little dot stitches in all the blue areas, like I said. I went round again in my 2 circles that I stitched around my paper template and did some little vertical stitches in this sort of a beige colour, just to pop that circle out a little bit more. And I did tiny red seed stitches. Now if you do dent seed stitches, it does stiffen that area, so I'd only do that in sort of small areas, otherwise that'll make the whole thing really stiff. And then in this area here of my son's check shirt, to kind of echo the checks, the red and blue, I did blue running stitches going one way and then red running stitches going the other way, and because that was on the diagonal they're going straight, so that I just like that now, and the contrast between that and that. I don't know what I'll do here yet, that's outside the circle. And then the final thing that I did is I just went around all the areas that were then left just with running stitches echoing the shape of my circle. So that's the inside of my circle all stitched, and next week I'll look at the outside. So I hope that's given you lots of ideas, and I hope you enjoy stitching on your comfort coverlet this week. And thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to you joining me next time for more Cloth Tales. Bye bye!